And then, "You're just a clerk," Richard said, his voice echoing across the boardroom. Laughter rippled through the room, but I stayed silent. What they didn't know was that in my briefcase sat a contract, signed, sealed, and capable of turning their world upside down. For months, I'd been the man they ignored, the one they talked over, the one they thought they could replace. Tomorrow morning, the same man who humiliated me would see my name in lights, not as an employee, but as his equal. And when that moment came, he would never see the knife I'd been sharpening in the shadows. The conference room was silent, except for the hum of the overhead lights. Richard Hale leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk spreading across his face. "You're just a clerk," he said, loud enough for the entire board to hear. The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and foul. A ripple of chuckles moved through the room, a wave of approval from those too afraid to oppose him. My jaw tightened, but I didn't respond. That was exactly what he wanted, a reaction he could twist into insubordination. I glanced down at my phone, trying to steady my breath. A tiny green light blinked. One new message. The preview line read, "I saw what they did to you. I have something you need to see." My stomach tightened. My eyes flicked around the room. No one seemed to be looking at me. I slid the phone into my pocket without opening it. The meeting dragged on. Richard speaking as if every word he uttered was gospel. I scribbled notes that didn't matter, numbers and bullet points that would be rewritten by someone else and credited to someone else. By the time we were dismissed, my head pounded. That night, I pulled into the driveway long after the street lights had come on. The living room lamp cast a warm glow through the curtains. My daughter's shoes were by the door, her little jacket hanging on the hook. She was in her pajamas, sitting cross-legged on the couch, watching a cartoon. When she saw me, her eyes lit up. "Daddy, do they like you at work?" she asked, tilting her head the way she does when she's trying to figure out if I'm telling the truth. I forced a smile. "Of course they do, sweetheart." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she turned back to the screen. I kissed the top of her head, the guilt settling deeper into my chest. Later, in the quiet of my study, I opened the message. Attached was a photo of a contract. Richard's bold signature was scrawled across the bottom, but my attention snapped to a clause buried halfway down the page. It was illegal. Not a gray area, not questionable, illegal. The next morning, I arrived early. The office was nearly empty, the quiet almost unnerving. I plugged in a small external drive and began pulling every file connected to that contract. My hands moved quickly, scanning folders, checking dates. I transferred everything onto a USB drive, the little blue light on it flashing like a heartbeat. When it was done, I slipped the drive into my pocket and walked to the break room. The scent of burnt coffee lingered. I opened the cupboard above the sink and reached for the salt jar, a dull ceramic thing no one ever touched. Carefully, I pried off the lid and dropped the USB inside, then slid it to the back of the shelf. No one would think to look there. Back at my desk, I woke my computer. The screen lit up, and before I could even click the mouse, a red pop-up appeared. Access denied. My pulse kicked up. I tried again. Same message. My email was inaccessible. My shared drives were gone. Someone had locked me out. If you were me, would you keep going or walk away? The question echoed in my head as I grabbed my phone and dialed my mother. Her voice was warm, steady. We talked about the weather, about her neighbor's garden. I didn't tell her what was going on. I didn't want to hear her worry. But before we hung up, she said, "Good people don't always win, son. Sometimes they just survive." That night, when the house was quiet, I went to check the USB. I opened the cupboard, reached for the salt jar, and lifted the lid. My fingers felt only grains of salt. The jar was empty. The salt jar's emptiness burned in my mind like a fever. Someone knew. Someone had been in my house, close enough to touch the things I'd hidden. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, exhaustion and anger had sharpened into something more dangerous, a kind of reckless determination. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, fingers hammering the keys. Job application after job application flew out. I didn't tailor my resume, didn't bother with cover letters. I applied to boutique firms, sprawling corporations, even smaller startups. 30 applications in one night, a storm of resumes scattered into the digital void. If this place wanted me gone, I'd make sure I had somewhere to land before they could shove me out the door. It wasn't until the following evening that my phone buzzed with a new email. Subject: confidential invitation. It was from a top-tier law firm whose name carried weight in every corporate boardroom on the East Coast. The body of the email was brief. "We've reviewed your background. We'd like to discuss a potential opportunity. Meet us at the Riverside Charity Gala this Friday, 8 p.m. Discretion is paramount." I stared at the screen. My first thought wasn't excitement. It was suspicion. How had they found me so quickly? And why a gala? Still, the curiosity gnawed at me, and by Friday night I found myself in a dark suit, stepping into the glittering lobby of the Riverside Hotel. The place was a cathedral of glass and gold. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over marble floors. Laughter and polite conversation swirled around me, the air thick with the smell of champagne and expensive perfume. I moved through the crowd, scanning the faces, until my gaze locked on someone I knew too well. Richard. He was at the far end of the room, shaking hands, his smile practiced and lethal. And then he saw me. His eyebrows rose just slightly before he began moving in my direction, parting the crowd with that predatory grace I'd come to hate. For a moment, I froze. My mind went back to the very first time I'd met him in a cramped office years ago. He'd looked over my resume, smiled, and said, "You're sharp. We could use someone like you." Back then, I'd taken it as a promise. I didn't realize it was bait. I turned, moving toward the bar to put some distance between us, but the crowd pressed in. I could feel him closing in behind me. A hand landed on my shoulder. I spun, bracing myself, but it wasn't Richard. The man in front of me was older now, his hair gone silver, but I knew him instantly. Thomas Blake. My first mentor, the man who taught me how to navigate the shark-infested waters of corporate law without losing my soul. I hadn't seen him in over a decade. "Daniel," he said, smiling faintly. "We need to talk." We slipped away from the noise, finding a corner table in a quieter lounge. Blake leaned back, studying me. "I'm the one who sent you that message," he said. I felt my chest tighten. "The contract photo?" He nodded. "And the USB. You're sloppy, by the way. The salt jar? Creative, but not exactly a safe." I swallowed hard. "You took it?" "I kept it safe," he corrected. "And I'm not just here to hand it back. I'm here because Richard Hale's empire is rotting from the inside, and I intend to buy the pieces before they collapse." I stared at him. the noise of the gala fading into a dull hum. "You're talking about a hostile takeover." Blake smiled. Hostile is such an ugly word. Let's call it strategic rescue. From his leather briefcase, he pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a contract, sleek, simple, elegant. My name was printed neatly at the top, followed by a title that made my pulse jump. Partner. It was unsigned. "You'd be my inside man," Blake said. "Feed me what I need, and when the deal closes, you'll be sitting at the table with me. Equal footing." I stared at the paper, the weight of it pressing down on me. My mind was already spinning with the possibilities, the risks, the ways this could all go wrong. We moved to a quiet cafe down the street, away from the glittering eyes of the gala. Sitting across from him, I wrapped my hands around the warmth of a coffee mug, trying to ground myself. "I'm not just thinking about me," I told him. "I have a family, a little girl. If I get caught in the middle of this, they'll be the ones paying for it." Blake leaned forward, his voice low. "Daniel, Richard has already painted a target on your back. You can either keep running until you're cornered, or you can turn and choose the battleground." The words landed heavily, the truth in them undeniable. Still, the thought of my daughter's face, if something went wrong, twisted in my gut. We parted with no decision made, but the contract stayed with me, folded neatly in my coat pocket. Back home, the house was dark. I hung my jacket, poured a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table. My phone buzzed. One new message from an unknown number. "We know what you're planning." The message, "We know what you're planning," still sat on my phone like a live wire. I didn't reply. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I walked into the office with a calmness I didn't feel. My workstation had been partially restored, though my access was limited. That didn't matter. I had a new approach. With a small flash drive disguised as a wireless mouse adapter, I began installing a backdoor into the company's internal document system. Lines of code scrolled down my screen like falling rain. I worked quickly, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. Halfway through, a red light flickered above me. I looked up. The office camera, one that had been dark for months, was suddenly on. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Someone was watching. I kept typing, acting as though I hadn't noticed. The back door finished installing. My drive blinked once and then went still. I ejected it, slipped it into my pocket, and stood. The micro cliffhanger arrived before lunch. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Major leak from Hale & Co. Sends stock tumbling 14% in hours. My breath caught. An internal email, one I'd seen just days ago, was plastered on financial news sites, revealing questionable payments to an overseas contractor. I hadn't leaked it, which meant someone else was in the game. At home that evening, I tried to focus on dinner. My daughter climbed onto my lap, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Daddy, can you not go to work tomorrow? We could go to the park, just us." I smiled, my chest tightening. "Just a few more days, sweetheart. I promise." I hated the sound of my own voice, half hope, half lie. The next morning, an email from HR summoned me to a mandatory all-hands meeting at 10 a.m. When I walked into the boardroom, Richard was already there, flanked by senior managers. His gaze swept the room, scanning each face until it landed on mine. He didn't look away. "Close the door," he said. The air in the room seemed heavier. My pulse drummed in my ears. This wasn't going to be an ordinary meeting. Before I could dwell on it, The door opened, and Mark Jennings, a mid-level analyst, was escorted in by security. His eyes darted around the room, wide and panicked. Richard's tone was sharp, almost theatrical. "We've identified the source of the leak," he announced. "Mr. Jennings here has been terminated for breach of confidentiality." Gasps rippled across the table. Mark's gaze found mine. His jaw worked like he wanted to speak, but instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a small USB drive, and dropped it into my hand as he passed. His fingers closed around mine for a brief second. "You didn't get this from me," he murmured. Then he was gone. Hours later, in the privacy of my car, I plugged the drive into my laptop. My breath caught as the video began to play. Richard sat in a dimly lit restaurant booth, sliding a thick envelope across the table to a man I didn't recognize. The camera angle was low, probably from a phone hidden in a pocket. The sound was muffled, but I could make out enough. Amounts, dates, instructions to make it disappear. If you had evidence like this in your hands, would you go public right now or wait for the perfect moment? I leaned back in the driver's seat, staring at the ceiling, my fingers trembling. This was it. The kind of proof Blake could use to burn Richard down to the ground. But it was also dangerous. If Richard found out I had this, there would be no turning back. I thought of my daughter. I thought of the look on her face when she asked me to skip work. And I thought of Richard's smug expression in that boardroom. My phone rang. The screen lit up with Blake's name. I answered. "It's time," he said. The boardroom was packed, every seat filled, the air charged with the low hum of whispered speculation. Richard stood at the head of the table, his tailored suit immaculate, his voice dripping with confidence. "Some people," he said, his eyes scanning the room, "are replaceable." His gaze lingered on me just long enough to draw the smirks of those who thought they were in on the joke. I didn't flinch. Before Richard could continue, the double doors at the back of the room swung open. A staffer wheeled in a sleek black stand with a large screen, the kind used for high-profile announcements. Without preamble, the screen lit up, the company's logo dissolving into bold white letters. "Welcome, our new partner, Daniel Carter." The room froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward me. I rose from my seat slowly, buttoned my jacket, and walked to the front of the room under the weight of 100 stunned eyes. The spotlight, literal and figurative, hit me square in the chest. Richard's face was a study in disbelief, quickly masked by a tight smile. I stepped close enough for only him to hear. "I own 40% of your company now," I murmured. His jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're doing," he whispered back. "We'll see," I said, then turned to face the rest of the board, my expression calm, collected. As applause, tentative at first, rippled through the room, my mind drifted backward to the day I first walked into this building. I'd been younger, hungrier, full of belief in the promise Richard had dangled in front of me. I remembered the handshake, the way he'd said, "You're sharp. We could use someone like you." That moment had felt like the beginning of something great. I hadn't realized it was the start of a slow betrayal. The meeting continued, but my attention was pulled back to the present by a vibration in my pocket. I glanced at my phone under the table. A new message glowed on the screen. "They're moving against you tonight." I left the boardroom with a polite nod, the applause still echoing faintly behind me. By the time I reached my office, Blake was already calling. "There's a faction inside Hale & Co. that's panicking about the takeover," he said. They're meeting tonight to sabotage the deal. Names? I asked. That's the thing, Blake replied. One of them is someone you once saved from getting fired 2 years ago. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of that detail pressing down hard. Loyalty was a rare currency in this place, but I'd thought I'd earned it from that person. Now I wasn't so sure. At home, my wife watched me pour a drink, her expression guarded. Is all this worth it? She asked. The late nights, the stress, our daughter asking when she'll see you again? I met her eyes. If I don't finish this, it's all for nothing. What they've done to me, to others. It doesn't stop unless someone makes it stop. She didn't argue, but the silence that followed felt heavier than words. That night, I walked into a dimly lit parking garage 2 blocks from the office. At the far end, a small group huddled near a black sedan. I recognized 2 of them immediately, senior managers who'd been in Richard's pocket for years. And then I saw the third. It was Alex Monroe, the analyst I defended in a disciplinary meeting years ago when Richard wanted to make an example of him. I'd saved his job. Alex's eyes widened when he saw me. The others turned, ready to bolt, but I raised my hand slightly. I'm not here to take you down, Alex. Not tonight. The 2 managers exchanged glances, then walked away, muttering curses. Alex stayed. Why? He asked, voice low. Because I think you know something they don't, I said. For a long moment, he hesitated. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. This is bigger than hail, he said. There's a group, off the books, that's been pulling strings here for years. Richard's just their front man. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of the documents inside. Why give this to me? Because you saved me once, Alex said. And I don't want to be on the wrong side when this all comes down. Back in my car, I tore the envelope open. Inside were photocopies of wire transfers, meeting notes, and a list of names. Some I recognized, others I didn't. At the top of the list was a phrase that sent a chill through me. The syndicate. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. This was about something much larger, much darker. By Monday morning, the internet had turned into a storm. The hashtag Shah Justice for Clerk was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. The old video of Richard sneering, "You're just a clerk," had been clipped, captioned, and remixed into dozens of formats. Some turned it into parody, others into rallying cries. By noon, the original clip had hit 10 million views. Every notification on my phone was a new tag, a new share, a new message from people I'd never met. Most of them were strangers offering support, but some were dangerous, anonymous threats, thinly veiled warnings to stop whatever I was doing. Then came the micro cliffhanger. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Mr. Carter," the voice said, smooth and practiced. "I'm Julia Price from The Ledger. We'd like to offer you an exclusive interview. Off the record at first, of course." I didn't answer right away. An interview could be powerful, but it could also paint a target even bigger on my back. "I'll think about it," I said finally, and hung up. That evening, I walked through the front door to find my daughter at the kitchen table, coloring. She looked up, her smile bright. "Dad, you're famous," she said, holding up a tablet with my face frozen in a still frame from the viral video. I managed to chuckle, ruffling her hair. Not exactly the kind of famous I wanted to be. Her laugh eased something in me. For a brief moment, the fight felt far away. But when she went back to her crayons, the weight of what I had to do settled back onto my shoulders. Later that night, I sat at my desk, the lamp casting a narrow cone of light across a stack of files. These were the documents Alex had given me, evidence of the syndicate's grip on Hale & Co. and its dealings. Without allowing myself another pause, I began uploading every file to a secure server, attaching them to a single email addressed to Julia Price. The subject line was simple: Truth. I hit send. The next day, chaos erupted. Headlines screamed across every business outlet. Richard Hale, the man who had built his brand on control and confidence, was now cornered. By noon, the board announced his resignation, effective immediately. But when Richard called me later that night, there was no anger in his voice, just a strange calm. "Daniel," he said, "meet me at my office. One last conversation." I found him sitting behind his desk, the city skyline a glittering backdrop. His suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. "You think you've won?" he said. "But you haven't. You've just been moved into a different game. You're not the player here. You're a piece, same as me." I didn't reply. Richard opened a drawer and slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were documents with letterheads I didn't recognize, all tied to a multinational conglomerate. The names were foreign, the bank accounts offshore. "That's your bigger enemy," he said quietly. "The syndicate answers to them. And trust me, they don't like being exposed." The micro cliffhanger tightened around my thoughts. This wasn't just a corrupt CEO. This was an organization that could swallow entire companies whole without the public ever knowing. That night, I stood on my apartment balcony, the city spread out before me. Neon signs flickered in the distance, the hum of traffic carrying up through the cool air. For a moment, I let myself breathe. The battle with Richard was over, but the war was just changing shape. I didn't hear him enter until he spoke. Richard stood in my living room, uninvited, but somehow not threatening. He placed a thick file on the coffee table. "Take them down," he said. Then he walked out, leaving the door swinging gently in his wake. The first days after Richard's resignation felt almost unreal. The chaos inside Hale & Co. slowly ebbed, replaced by the quiet precision of Blake's takeover strategy. I found myself spending more time in Blake's new office than in my own apartment, working side by side with him and his small circle of trusted advisors. We built something new from the ruins. Not a faceless corporate machine, but a workplace where merit actually mattered, where junior staff weren't afraid to speak up in meetings, where wins were celebrated collectively, not hoarded by whoever shouted loudest. Transparency became the core of every policy we wrote. Salaries were published internally. Whistleblower protections were more than just words in an employee handbook. They were enforced. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't constantly on guard. One Thursday morning, I was reviewing a draft proposal when my phone buzzed. The subject line was short, the body even shorter. "They know about the files." No sender name, no signature. I stared at it for a full minute, the coffee cooling in my hand. My mind flashed to the documents Richard had given me, the proof that the syndicate answered to a shadowy multinational conglomerate. If the people behind that empire knew I had the files, it meant they were already looking for me. I didn't tell Blake right away. Instead, I spent the rest of the morning combing through security protocols, making sure every trace of the files was backed up and encrypted beyond reach. By the time I shut down my computer, I'd convinced myself I still had time. The next day, I let myself take a breath. I woke before dawn and, for the first time in years, drove my daughter to school. She clung to my arm the whole ride, chatting about a science project and a friend's birthday party. When we pulled up to the curb, she grinned and said, "You should do this more often, Dad." "I will," I promised, though I knew the fight wasn't over. That evening, I was pouring a drink when the TV lit up with breaking news. A headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Global conglomerate under investigation for financial crimes. The name was unmistakable. It was the same one at the top of the documents Richard had handed me. The anchor's voice was steady, but the details were damning. Illegal offshore accounts, shell companies used to launder billions, political connections spanning continents. This was it, the first crack in their armor. I turned off the TV and sat in the dark for a while, feeling the strange weight of vindication. The conglomerate wasn't untouchable anymore. Over the next months, the industry began to shift. Hale & Co., under Blake's leadership, became a model for ethical restructuring. Competitors were forced to adapt, to abandon some of the shadier practices that had once been standard. The press began calling it the Carter effect, though I never asked for the name. One afternoon, Blake called me into his office. He was leaning against his desk, a single folder in his hand. "You've done more than I could have imagined," he said, "and I think it's time you take this." He opened the folder to reveal a single-page document, an official transfer of executive authority. "Effective immediately," Blake said. "You're in charge. This company is yours to run." The micro cliffhanger hit me like a punch. I'd never wanted to be a CEO, not in the traditional sense. But here it was, the power to shape something lasting, to make sure no one else went through what I had. I took the document, my hand steady even as my mind raced. "You trust me with this?" "I trust what you've proven you are," Blake said. That weekend, we celebrated my daughter's birthday. She was turning 8. The living room was a riot of balloons and wrapping paper, the air filled with the smell of cake. After the guests had gone and the house was quiet, I tucked her into bed. She was almost asleep when I whispered, "I kept my promise." Her small hand squeezed mine, and for a moment, that was enough. But I knew peace never lasted long in my world. A week later, I was walking past the tall windows of my office when my gaze caught on a building across the city. The sleek glass tower that housed the headquarters of the multinational conglomerate. The setting sun turned its surface to molten gold, but all I could see was the shadow behind it. I thought of the files locked away in my secure server, of the people whose names were on them, of the quiet warning that had landed in my inbox. The war with Richard had been personal. This one would be global. I stood there, staring at that building, already planning the first move.